Hello and welcome to the old Fliers. Operation Lusty, an acronym from the initials of the Luftwaffe secret technology, was the United States Army Air Force's effort to capture and evaluate German aeronautical technology during and after World War II. During World War II, the US Army Air Force's intelligence service had sent teams to Europe to gain access to enemy aircraft, technical and scientific reports, research facilities and weapons for study in the United States. Much was to be gained from the German programs, such as those that produced the Me-262 and Dornier 335. 1 month before VE Day, the US Air Force combined technical and intelligence objectives with the code name Lusty. The operation had two teams. Team 1, under the leadership of Colonel Harold E. Watson, a former Wright Field test pilot, collected enemy aircraft and weapons for further examination in the United States. Team 2, under the leadership of Colonel Howard M. McCoy, recruited scientists, collected documents and investigated facilities. Intelligence experts at Wright Field had developed lists of advanced aviation equipment they wanted to examine. Watson and his crew, nicknamed Watson's Whizzes, were composed of pilots, engineers and maintenance men. Watson organised his Whizzes into two sections. One collected jet aircraft, while the other procured piston engine aircraft and non-flyable jet and rocket equipment. Some 4 months before Germany surrendered, it has been alleged that the Whizzes recruited captured Luftwaffe personnel and pilots held at Fort Bliss, Texas, to go into what would become the British, French and Soviet-controlled areas after VE Day to fly up, hide or otherwise remove to US-controlled areas all blacklisted planes, secret weapons, equipment and supporting documents. Once found, they had to be shipped to the United States. In Operation Seahorse, the British loaned them the escort carrier HMS Reaper. The most viable harbour for docking the carrier and loading the aircraft was at Cherbourg in France. The Whizzes flew the Me-262s and other aircraft, including an Arado AR-234 from Lechfield onto Cherbourg. All the aircraft were loaded onto the carrier and taken to the United States, where they were offloaded at Newark Army Airfield. They were then studied at their respective flight test centres. For the Air Force, that was at Wilbur Wright Field. For the Navy, the Patuxent Naval Air Test Centre. Eric Wrinkle Brown, a Royal Navy aviation officer who spoke fluent German, and Siegfried Kleimer, a World War II German aviation technology expert who worked for the US Air Force after the war, played significant roles in this project. Eric Brown flew captured German aircraft to Farnborough for evaluation by the British, and his interview about this time is fascinating.
2 months after I entered Germany, in the American occupation zone, they had a house near Luxembourg where they had some fairly high-ranking Germans in captivity, and one of them was Reichsmarschall Goering. I was given limited access to him to talk to him. I was told I mustn't talk about anything political, but could talk about the Luftwaffe aspects. He liked to talk, obviously, to pilots. One of the problems of Goering was he was as much interested in interrogating me as I was in interrogating him. He wanted to know a lot about our feelings of how the Luftwaffe were doing, where they went wrong, and when the cracks started to show from our point of view. So I found him very, very interesting from that aspect.
The first German successful ejection was in a jet Heinkel 280 in January 1942. and totally successful. We were up against a really technologically very advanced enemy. In fact, more technologically advanced than we were. They were way ahead of us with ejection seats. They didn't use cordite like Martin Baker eventually did. They used compressed air. And the one thing I think that showed their forward thinking was they reckoned that if aircrew had to use the ejection seat, they were in deep trouble and probably were out of control. And if they were out of control, the chances were they were being subjected to high G. Now, I found this in the DH-108. I got into a situation with a runaway oscillation and wanted to eject, but I was being subjected to 4G most of the time. And your arms are down here and you can't get them up to pull the blind. And there's nothing I could do. I just sit back and think of England. And but in the German situation, they had thought of this and had at the pilot's left thigh a trigger. And if you pushed that, out you went. Without face blind, of course, so you took a bit of a battering, but you got out. On the other hand, they had the disasters. Do you remember the Dornier 335, the one, the engine in front and the engine behind? When I was testing those, we dug out the German test pilots somewhere, and they told us a story that two had crashed and they'd found the test pilots with no arms. And we were very puzzled by this. So we looked into it at Farnborough, and because the sequence was, you had three buttons here, and you pressed one, that blew the rear prop off. Pressed two, that blew the fin and rudder off. So the mincing machines had gone. Three, you armed it, but then you had to jettison the canopy before you could pull the blind. And the canopy, say you're going that direction, had two things at each side of the canopy, two levers. And you had to grip these and pull them back over top dead centre, and then it would go. But they were very difficult to pull. And, you know, you really had to hold and pull that, and then suddenly, bang, away it went. And they reckon these guys were holding so tight, the way it went, arms went with it. And so we checked this out in the windtulls of Farnborough, and it looked that way. It was a very fast airplane. The problem was the engines hadn't been developed, and the rear engine tended to overheat. It was a little dangerous. In fact, the casualties we had at Farnborough and the Americans had were rear engines overheating. The night fighter that they hoped would be up to the Monthan, it was far from it. It was the Heinkel 219. Mind you, it was a remarkable airplane because it was the first production aircraft with ejection seats for both crew. And it also had the thing that frightened the wits out of the bomber command. It had a thing called Schregermusik, which were two 30mm guns on top of the aircrew cabin, angled up at 60 degrees. And you just flew under the thing and let blast. On the first sortie a Heinkel 219 ever made, it killed 6 Lanks in one sortie. It also, in its operational career, had 12 ejections of both crew, pilot and radar, all totally successful.
What do you remember of the captured German aircraft exhibition in 1945?
Oh, a lot.
because I was very involved. We had brought all the aircraft back. I was one of the pilots who was mainly involved. There were only two really involved in bringing back the jets to Farnborough. And then we had the exhibition, and we were each assigned, when I say each, we only had 4 pilots in Aeroflight at that time, an aircraft to demonstrate during that week. And I was demonstrating the Heinkel 162, which was the little Volksjäger. And the Heinkel 162 wasn't a great aerobatic airplane because the jet engine, the BMW 003 jet engine, would only stand 3 seconds of inverted flight. So you had to get round pretty quick, but it had a marvellous rate of roll, so that was no worry really.
The testing or evaluation of German aircraft ended in 1946 after the crash of the Dornier 335. If that hadn't have happened, do you think testing would have continued, or had you learned everything that you could learn?
No, I think we'd sucked the orange dry, frankly, yes. And there wasn't much more for us to learn from it. After the war, they were just really museum pieces.
There was a race to deny their allies, the Russians, this treasure trove of technology. After the war, the Whizzes added Luftwaffe test pilots to the team, one being Hauptmann Heinz Brauer. On the 8th of May 1945, VE Day in Europe, Brauer had flown 70 women, children and wounded troops to Munich Riem Airport. After he landed, Brauer was approached by one of Watson's men who gave him the choice of either going to prison camp or flying with the Whizzes. Guess what he took? Brauer thought flying preferable. He was joined by test pilots Ludwig Hoffmann, Hermann Kirsting and engineer Gerhard Kulis. When the Whizzes located 9 Messerschmitt Me-262 jet aircraft at Litchfield Airfield near Augsburg, these German test pilots had the expertise to fly them. It was remarkable that the Germans had not destroyed aircraft such as these, knowing the end was near. Erich Brown believed that they were so proud of what they had designed and built that they couldn't bring themselves to do it. General Hap Arnold ordered the preservation of one of every type of aircraft used by the enemy forces. In the end, Operation Lusty collectors had acquired 16,280 items weighing 6,200 tonnes to be examined by intelligence personnel who selected 2,398 separate items for technical analysis. The larger aircraft were sent to Davis-Monthan Field, Arizona, and the fighter aircraft sent to the special depot in Park Ridge, Illinois, now O'Hare Airport. In 1953, some of the aircraft were moved to what would later become known as the National Air and Space Museum's Garber Restoration Facility in Sweetland, Maryland, and the remaining aircraft were scrapped. It is possible that an example of the Junkers Ju-294 engined maritime patrol aircraft and a captured Heinkel HE-177A7, a late war development of the Luftwaffe's only operational heavy bomber, were crushed flat and buried under the modern O'Hare Airport runways. Operation Lusty resulted in the survival of the sole existing examples of the Arado AR-234 jet reconnaissance bomber, the Dornier Do-335 twin-engine heavy fighter, the German Heinkel HE-209 night fighter, as well as the Junkers Ju-388 reconnaissance model, all of which are in the collection of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and hit the notify bell. Comments always welcome.